A line cook seasoned his dinner with a handful of pink curing salt. This is what happened to his blood. Presenting to the emergency department, 32-year-old JM was a terrifying shade of slate blue. Despite receiving high-flow oxygen, his saturation levels remained dangerously low, and his blood appeared dark chocolate brown inside the syringe. We will examine the chemical oxidation of iron and the clinical mystery of the saturation gap that nearly cost him his life. At Anatomy of a Mistake, we look at how small errors in a high-pressure environment can lead to systemic collapse. JM arrived in the trauma bay with central cyanosis, from the Greek kyanos, meaning dark blue, and osis, denoting a process or condition. His lips and fingernails were the color of a bruised plum, yet his lungs were perfectly clear. The medical team was witnessing a paradox, a patient gasping for air while his monitor insisted his blood was nearly 85% saturated with oxygen. Usually, supplemental oxygen flushes a patient's skin back to a healthy pink, but as the liters climbed, JM stayed blue. This suggested the problem was not a lack of oxygen in the room, but a fundamental failure of the blood to carry it. The mystery deepened when the phlebotomist drew a sample. Instead of the bright cherry red hue of arterial blood, the syringe filled with a thick, muddy brown liquid. This liquid refused to turn red even when exposed to the air. Within 30 minutes of tasting the family meal soup, JM felt a wave of intense heat. This was followed by a pounding headache that throbbed in time with his racing heart. In the kitchen, his co-workers watched in horror as his skin underwent a morbid transformation. His lips and fingernails shifted into a deep ashen slate gray. This was a visual signal that the blood was no longer saturated with life-sustaining oxygen. Despite having no history of asthma, JM began gasping in a state of air hunger. The nitrite ions he accidentally ingested acted as potent vasodilators, from the Latin vas, meaning vessel, and dilatare, to spread out. This caused his blood vessels to relax so rapidly that his blood pressure cratered, leading to profound hypotension. As he sat in the break room, his body was trapped in a physiological trap. He was surrounded by oxygen, yet his blood was becoming a dark chocolate-brown sludge. As JM is rushed into the trauma bay, the triage nurse notes his peripheral pulses are rapid and thready, indicating his heart is working overtime to compensate for an invisible oxygen deficit. A nurse snaps a pulse oximeter onto his finger, but the device behaves strangely. Instead of a rapid climb toward 100%, the screen locks at exactly 85%. Even as the team cranks the supplemental oxygen to the highest possible flow, the number refuses to budge. This is refractory hypoxemia, from the Greek hypo, meaning under, ox, referring to oxygen, and emia, meaning in the blood. In this state, the low oxygen levels in the blood are stubborn and unresponsive to standard treatment. Pulse oximetry readings on his finger show 85% saturation, yet his lungs are clear and his breathing effort is massive, a mismatch that signals a cellular-level crisis. The dark color of the sample is due to the presence of methemoglobin, which cannot bind oxygen, effectively turning the blood into a useless fluid that circulates but does not nourish. To test a theory, the clinician performs an air test, exposing the brown blood to the room's air to see if it will turn red. It does not. The blood remains a muddy brown, suggesting that the hemoglobin itself has been chemically altered at a molecular level. The laboratory results finally provide the answer, revealing a condition known as methemoglobinemia. This term comes from the Greek roots meta, meaning change, hemoglobin the oxygen-carrying protein, and emia, meaning in the blood. Essentially, the chemistry of his life-sustaining protein has been fundamentally altered. The lab technician identifies a massive saturation gap, which is a significant discrepancy between the calculated oxygen saturation and the actual measured saturation. While the arterial blood gas shows a partial pressure of oxygen of 100 millimeters of mercury, the CO oxygen reveals saturation as catastrophically low. This occurs because the sodium nitrite he ingested is a potent oxidizing agent. In a healthy state, hemoglobin contains iron in the ferrous state, or Fe2+. From the Latin ferrum, meaning iron, this is the only form that can bind oxygen. However, the nitrite ions have stripped an electron from the iron, forcing it into the ferric state, or Fe3+. While normal methemoglobin levels are less than 1%, JM's levels have skyrocketed as his hemoglobin is converted into a form that is chemically locked. This ferric iron is essentially rusted at the molecular level, creating a saturation gap where the blood is full of oxygen that it simply cannot release. This molecular hijacking means that even though JM is breathing deeply, his tissues are beginning to suffocate. By 4 hours post-ingestion, JM is effectively suffocating in a room full of air. To understand why, we have to look at the oxygen dissociation curve, which has undergone a catastrophic left shift. Imagine hemoglobin as a fleet of delivery trucks. Normally, these trucks pick up oxygen in the lungs and drop it off at the tissues. But the sodium nitrite has welded iron cages over the truck beds. This is the ferric state. Not only can these cage trucks no longer carry cargo, but their presence causes the remaining normal trucks to develop a pathological obsession with their own oxygen. They refuse to let go. This is the left shift. The blood hoards oxygen rather than releasing it, leaving the organs to starve. As his methemoglobin levels climb past 50%, JM begins to seize. His brain, deprived of usable fuel, enters a state of metabolic acidosis, from the Greek acidus, meaning sour, and osis, a process. Without oxygen, his cells switch from aerobic to anaerobic metabolism, a desperate backup system that produces a massive spike in lactic acid. This chemical buildup poisons the blood's pH. His heart rate climbs as he develops tachycardia, from the Greek tachys, meaning swift, and cardia, heart. His myocardium is screaming for a delivery that will never come. Because sodium nitrite is used industrially to prevent botulism in cured meats, its concentration in pure curing salt is potent enough to bypass the body's natural antioxidant defenses in seconds. If the medical team cannot find a way to unlock those molecular cages, his heart will simply stop. With JM spiraling toward a fatal threshold, the medical team must perform a chemical rescue that seems entirely counterintuitive. They prepare an infusion of methylene blue. There is a profound irony here. To save a man whose skin has turned blue, the doctors must inject a dark blue dye. Methylene blue acts like a molecular rechargeable battery. Once inside the body, it is converted into leucomethylene blue. This then seeks out the rusted ferric iron in JM's blood. It begins donating electrons back to the hemoglobin, restoring the functional ferrous state. This process is powered by an enzyme called NADPH methemoglobin reductase. The suffix -ase denotes an enzyme, while reduct comes from the chemical process of reduction, which means the gain of electrons. As the blue liquid enters his system, the transformation is visible to the naked eye. Within minutes, the slate gray tint in JM's lips and nail beds begins to recede, replaced by a healthy pink, as his hemoglobin finally releases its grip on oxygen. Without this intervention, methemoglobin levels exceeding 70% are typically fatal, as the heart simply cannot keep up with the cellular debt. A final check shows his levels have dropped below 5%. JM would eventually make a full recovery. This is a reminder that in the kitchen, the smallest substitution can change your very chemistry. This event highlights the critical need for distinct labeling and storage protocols for chemical additives that look identical to harmless table salt. While table salt is essential for life, its chemical cousin, sodium nitrite, is a potent oxidant that can turn the oxygen transport system into a molecular prison. By understanding the saturation gap, clinicians were able to identify that the problem was not in JM's lungs, but in the very electrons of his iron. This case highlights why curing salts are dyed pink to prevent the exact type of accidental substitution that nearly ended JM's life. Thank you for watching this breakdown of how a simple seasoning error can lead to systemic failure. To understand more about how common substances can trigger acute metabolic emergencies, follow our deep dives into the clinical crossroads of medicine and daily life. Take care of yourself and be well. These stories are educational composites inspired by cases clinicians may encounter. They are not a substitute for professional medical advice.